Hi, everybody. My name is Nanika Edwards. I am a poet, author, and artist, linguist, educator from Trinidad and Tobago. And for the next little while, I would like to deal with the topic of depression. I am not a trained counselor, but I have learned so much from the Bible that has so many principles, so many life hacks that have helped me to manage my own challenges with, mental well-being. That I thought I would share some of them with you. Some of you may be experiencing your own challenges, and for many of you, I'm willing to bet that depression is one of them. Okay, so far we've learned that one of the things, the main thing that causes depression is anxiety, right? Anxiety is the main cause of depression, and I, shared with you, how you can neutralize that problem, or how you can how do you put that? How you can deactivate that particular problem when it comes, lurking around your borders, right? Your personal borders. Okay, so let me see, I've got my notes here. The second thing that I think is can be a cause of depression, not for everybody, but for some people, like, don't think that I'm saying if you have depression, it has to be because of this particular issue that I'm about to highlight. But for some people, it does apply. So, sin. Unresolved sin can cause depression. So I think a good example of that would be King Saul in the book of Samuel, the first book of Samuel. And you can read about Saul. He started off as a very humble person. He came from a humble background. As he said, he was from the least of the tribes of Israel, and even within his tribe, his family was like the least of the least, right? So I think that even coming into kingship, even though he was a tall man of great physical stature, there was a sense in which he thought of himself as a small person, right? He had a small view of himself. Like many of us, he judged himself not according to how God defined him, as somebody made in his image and therefore being intrinsically special and important. He judged himself by, the typical superficial standards that people tend to judge people by. Do you have a good job? Do you have a lot of money? Do you have a big house? Do you have a fancy car? Can you wear fancy clothes? Are you well put together? Are you, those are the kind of silly things that people use to determine somebody's intrinsic value. Let me tell you, those things are worthless. They mean very little in the eyes of God. And there are many people who have all of those things. They're going to end up in hell, and God will say, you never impressed me. With all that stuff, you never impressed me. So don't be fooled by those things. But anyway, King Saul came into kingship with an Achilles heel, and that is that he had a very small view of himself. And you can read the book of Samuel, especially I think the first book of Samuel. I don't think he's in the second book, but he's in the first book, and you can learn about him. And if I'm wrong about him not being in the second book, I apologize, but I do think he's in the first book of Samuel in the Bible. And I'll just list what I think some of his sins were. So essentially, this is what he did. He God told him to do something in particular, and he did not do it, right? He didn't do it because he was, in long story short, he was impatient. He was supposed to have waited for Samuel, the prophet Samuel, whom that book is named after, the book of Samuel. He was supposed to have waited for him to do to present a sacrifice to God or something like that, he didn't wait. He thought Samuel was taking too long, so he went ahead and did the sacrifice himself. And not only that, he was supposed to have completely annihilated, under God's command, particular enemies of God who God wanted to deal with decisively, emphatically, and permanently. And Saul did his own thing, and he did not completely wipe out these people. I know that may sound brutal. I know a lot of people don't like the bloodshed in the Old Testament, but I'm just telling you what happened, right? Now, because of that, God got so upset. I can understand why, because God had made a promise hundreds of years before that he was going to deal decisively with that group. So when Saul did not completely obey, what happened was he essentially made God look like a liar. He made God into a liar. God does not lie. What God says he's going to do, he does. And often he looks for human agents, if you want to put it like that, people who will partner with him, who will obey him and carry out his will. And when Saul didn't do what he wanted, God was very upset because it affected God's, I think it affected God's reputation, right? And God is very, what's the word I'm looking for? He's very protective of his reputation. So let me tell you, and on top of all of that, when David came on the scene as the person who was going to take over from Saul, right? But most people would not have known that, but eventually Saul saw him as a threat. So Saul, long story short, David became one of Saul's right-hand men in his army. You know, he killed Goliath and all of that. Everybody would know about David and Goliath. He entered his service and all of that, and married Saul's daughter, blah, blah, blah. And even after all of that, when Saul began to see him as a serious threat, which David was not, David was an honorable young man. He would have never mutinied or tried to grab the throne for himself. He would have never done that. But Saul, because he was paranoid, saw David as a threat and went so far as to try to kill him, right? Flung twice, I think on 2 occasions, tried pinning David to the wall with a javelin. And David always escaped thanks to the mercy of God. Long story short, let me get to what I think were Saul's unresolved sins. So Saul was rebellious. He was own way-ish, as we say in Trinidad. He liked to just do things the way he wanted to do things and not the way that God wanted to do things. I think maybe power went to his head, and as a king, maybe he liked the idea of just doing whatever he wanted because he may have had a skewed idea of what being a king meant. He was envious, and as I say on my Facebook page all the time, if you want to completely corrupt your character, completely destroy your inner world, then you let envy run rampant, run wild within you. I promise you that's the quickest way to do it. One of the quickest ways. So Saul was envious. He didn't deal with his envy like so many of us. Most envious people, you can't tell them that they're envious because they would deny it, right? People don't like to admit that they're envious. But to quote Dr. Phil, we cannot change what we don't acknowledge, right? So he was envious. He was dishonest. He was dishonest in the sense that, I think he had promised his daughter to David, and then he took, when David, he promised his daughter to David on condition that David carried out a certain military challenge. And the challenge was designed, it was meant to lead to David's death. But David, he was unbeatable, and he carried out the challenge, and should have And Saul should have given him his daughter in marriage, but I think he gave her to somebody else, something like that. So he was dishonest. Saul was devious and dishonest. And I'll tell you something, if you want the fastest way to get to the place where you do not like yourself is to be dishonest. Most dishonest people do not like themselves because they know that they're not made of much, right? So if you want to like yourself, be honest, because that is directly linked to I think it's directly linked to depression. If you don't like yourself, if you can't enjoy your own company, you won't be able to enjoy anybody else's company. You always have to come back to yourself, whether you're in a house by yourself, you're going to bed at night, you lay your head on the pillow, you're the last person to be with yourself at night. You will be miserable if you're dishonest and you don't like yourself. And there are so many different levels to what, so many different dimensions to what dishonesty looks like. So Saul was envious, he was dishonest, he was arrogant, he was small-minded, right? He's small-minded. People who are envious, people who like to slander other people who like to undercut their rivals are very petty and small-minded. He was small-minded, he was spiteful, he was murderous, he was idolatrous, like he put himself and the opinion of the people above God, because the reason why, I think he said that, what was it? The reason why he didn't, the reason why he carried out that sacrifice that Samuel should have dealt with, the reason why Saul did that prematurely, I think was because he was afraid of how he was going to look in the eyes of the people or something like that. So he was idolatrous. He put the people in front of God and he put himself in front of God. He was me focused, right? And maybe he had many other flaws that I just haven't thought of. So what happened in Saul's case, and again, this may not be relevant to what you're going through if you're dealing with depression. In Saul's case, the Bible says that God sent an evil spirit. God sent an evil spirit to torment Saul. And interestingly enough, his servants recognized that. And that's when they suggested, listen, why don't you get someone to play some music for you so you can get some relief? That's when David was hired. And that's how God started introducing David into, I think that's how he started introducing David into King Saul's life and narrative and into his palace. Anyway, that brings me to solution number 2 for depression: music or art therapy or expressive arts therapy. So the Bible says that whenever David played the harp, David was a skillful player, but not only was he technically skillful, he had an ability to play in such a way that someone could feel the Spirit of God soothing their soul. Have you ever listened to some really good Christian music, whether it's listening to somebody singing or something instrumental, and the music just takes you to a whole other plane, like it might have been down here and it brings you up here, you know? That's what a skillful Christian musician can do by the grace of God, just a gifting that God gives to different people, right? So David had that, and whenever he played for Saul, that that mood, that blue mood, that spirit actually used to run away and leave Saul alone, and then he would get some relief. And so on the one hand, sin can lead to depression, okay? Sin, not just sin, but unresolved sin, like sin and guilt that is not dealt with, can, I think, cause depression. And especially if it's willful. No, sin is willful. You know, it's one thing if you stumble, you make a mistake, you get back up, you get yourself right with God and you keep going. But when you are willful and you absolutely refuse to repent I think that depending on the dynamics of everything that's going on, it could lead to depression, right? Now, in the case of Saul, we also see that there was a spiritual dynamic. I do believe that this is me personally. I know that this is a controversial thing in the field of psychology and so on, but me personally, having experienced mental well-being challenges, I could tell you that there definitely is a spiritual dimension to things. Personally, I think it's a combination of the neurological with the spiritual. Oftentimes, I think what the Bible describes with respect to Saul is a good example of that. In my case, I could tell you that in many instances, I have used music in particular to help soothe my soul. Even now, there is a wonderful musician by the name of Dan Musulman, Dan, Dan Musulman, Musselman. I'll spell that again, Musselman. Dan Musulman on YouTube. He has some wonderful piano instrumental music, Christian instrumental music that absolutely soothes my soul, such that oftentimes I have felt the Spirit of God just soothing my soul. It's a little different sometimes from listening to, like, say, secular classical music. That can be soothing as well. When I was younger, I used to listen to a lot of classical music to soothe my soul when I felt down, and that works as well. But I find that the Christian music provides relief on a whole other level. So I would definitely recommend that. Whether you're a believer or not, music, as long as it's soothing, as long as it's not something that's gonna kind of rile up your soul and make you feel kind of antsy and anxious and a little too stimulated, that can work really well for helping people deal with depression. So the other thing is, if we just look at this a little more broadly, music is part of the world of the arts, and the arts in general, just what's going on there? Anyway, the arts in general offer a wonderful outlet for flushing our soul of toxins that make us feel depressed, that can make us feel depressed. So whether it's visual art, producing art, or looking at beautiful art, you go on Instagram, find a page with art that you like. Again, it needs to be something soothing, nothing dark that's going to make you feel worse. You got to pick and choose very carefully. So art, whether you're just looking at art or whether you're making beautiful art, I think making beautiful art is important, but it doesn't have to be the only thing you do. You can make art to express how you feel. Even just doing that can make you feel better, even if it's ugly art, right? Even if it's not beautiful art or pretty art, it can make you feel better. And the other thing, see how much time I've got here. Yeah, the other thing is that I know I've had times when, I remember once I was feeling really blue. This was many, many years ago, about, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago. I was feeling really, maybe 10 years ago. I can't remember when exactly, but I was feeling really, really down. I was lying down in one of the rooms in the house, and I just sensed God say, why don't you go on your computer and just play around with some art making a bit. And I did that. I made like these, I had some fun making paper collage ice cream cones. That's all I did, different versions of this ice cream cone. And by the end of it, I just felt like I'd never had a problem. Like I never felt bad. I felt perfectly fine. I didn't even realize when I stopped feeling bad. I think there's something about art making, because when you're making art, you're so focused on what you're doing that it distracts you from the thing that's making you feel down. So I think that art making is a wonderful way to help soothe feelings of just, not just feeling crummy, as we might say, just not feeling our best. The other thing is within, anything within the arts, if it's well applied, can help us effectively deal with depression. So, for example, you've got music, you've got visual art, you have photography, you have journaling, poetry, drama, dance, so many different things, sewing, knitting, all kinds of different things. And within art, there are so many different mediums that you could explore. There's drawing, painting, collaging, paper quilling. I don't know if you've ever heard of paper quilling. 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 If you never have, you can look it up. You can see what it's all about. So many different options. But again, if you are suffering from depression, you feel like you just can't shake this thing, like doing something artistic, especially if it's in a group, or if you want, you could do it individually. You could hire an artist just to do some projects with you, or you could hire better yet, you can work with a professional art therapist or expressive arts therapist. Art therapist would be somebody who deals specifically with visual art. We have some of them here in Trinidad. You could check them out. There's also, we have music therapists in Trinidad as well. And, there are all kinds of different types of expressive arts therapists. I've come across one or two poetry therapists as well. So with whatever floats your boat, if you want to explore this, I would encourage you, consider your options and maybe consider trying one of these solutions if depression is something that you struggle with. So that's it. I hope this was interesting. I hope it was helpful. Feel free to share your comments, thoughts, questions. And yeah, that's it for now. All right then. Bye.